When we talk about Egypt in a Jewish setting, what are some words that come to mind for you that you associate with Egypt? Exodus, okay. Any others? Slavery, yeah. Pharaoh, great, perfect. Yeah, for us as Jews, Egypt is the house of bondage, of slavery. Egypt is the very epitome of oppression, right? Sometimes I wonder, what would happen if we invited in some modern day Egyptians into our services and our classes, and they heard this trope? I feel like they might say, all right, we get it, right? But it's been, what, 3,000 plus years? Could we move on? And the answer is no. We cannot move on, actually, because the collective memory of our people's oppression in Egypt is central to who we are as Jews. It undergirds our identity as a marginalized people, and it motivates our commitment to social justice. During our Passover Seders, we say, in each and every generation, a person is obligated to see themselves as if each of us left Egypt. We personalize this history so that we internalize its lessons. And its lessons are manifest in many of the mitzvot in Torah. For example, from Leviticus, the stranger who resides among you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God. Our history of oppression is embedded deep within Jewish identity and practice. And this is important not only because it helps us to recognize that, unfortunately, persecutions have continued throughout Jewish history, but also because it motivates us to ally with other marginalized groups from a place of true solidarity and shared interests. And I wonder if sometimes we cling too tightly to these narratives of oppression. For me, when that moment in the Passover Seder arises, and I am supposed to imagine myself as if I personally experienced slavery in Egypt and was freed by God's mighty hand, I am keenly aware that I have no clue what it means to experience slavery or anything close to that level of oppression. It's important to recognize that most of us live lives of abundance and freedom. And this also has precedent in the Torah. In this week's Torah portion, we read about how our people's experience in Egypt started out, right? We get the backstory on what brought the Israelites down to Egypt in the first place. And if you're familiar with this portion, you might remember that it's not exactly like the Egypt we love to hate. Joseph's brothers have come down from Canaan to Egypt to purchase food because there's a famine in the region. And it turns out, lucky for them, right, that Joseph is running Egypt. He's Pharaoh's right-hand man. So then we have the whole story of the brothers' reconciliation. And it's a tearjerker. It's a beautiful story. I'm not talking about it tonight, so I just want to recommend for a little bit of Shabbos reading that you read that story, okay? But we're going to where the brothers have already reconciled. And Pharaoh hears that Joseph's brothers are in Egypt. Now, remember that we're talking about a Pharaoh who's different than the later Pharaoh of our persecution and oppression. Okay, so the Torah tells us that this earlier Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall live off the fat of the land. Do as follows. Take from the land of Egypt," he's instructing the brothers, "take from the land of Egypt wagons for your children and your wives, and bring your father Jacob here. And never mind your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt shall be yours. And that's what happens. Jacob arrives with all his descendants, and they are given great land and food and good jobs, even looking after Pharaoh's livestock. It is by all accounts a positive chapter in our history. This isn't the Egypt of our enslavement. And yes, that Egypt is coming. At the end of our Torah portion, it says, "Thus Israel settled in the country of Egypt in that good region of Goshen. They acquired holdings in it and were fertile and increased greatly." And when we read that phrase, "they were fertile and increased," in our minds we should hear a dun dun dun, right? Because that is foreshadowing what will come later, when a new Pharaoh arises over Egypt and he doesn't know Joseph. And he is threatened by the populous Israelites and oppresses them with harsh labor. Salo Baron is a historian who famously critiqued what he called a lachrymose conception of Jewish history. That is a way of conceiving of Jewish history as one tragedy followed by the next, without acknowledging all the good in the everyday lives of Jews that played out between those tragedies. So instead of committing a similar fallacy by cultivating a lachrymose conception of Jewish memory and the Jewish present, we might instead relate our own lives to the beginning of the Israelites' experience in Egypt. As it was for Jacob's family in Goshen, we too are well-resourced and well set up in the land of Brooklyn in 2021. And I don't think it's wrong or something we should feel guilty about, though maybe it is particular to my sort of millennial Jewish experience, and I'd be interested to hear if you feel that way. This lack of identification with Jewish suffering. So that's a conversation we can have later. I'll stay around. But in fact, I do think we can all celebrate that there is so much goodness in our lives. We can recognize the abundance that we enjoy and respond with gratitude. And this is also a deeply and ancient Jewish response. Whenever we pray the Amidah, we recite a Hoda'ah. It's a prayer of thanks to God for our lives, our souls, and the miracles that we experience every day. In fact, each time we say Baruch Atah Adonai, we could understand this not just as an expression of praise, but as a way to say thank you. True gratitude sets off a chain reaction, where we first recognize the good, then we express thanks, and then we act to share that good with others. As the psalmist says, "My cup runneth over." I think that this is the response that first Pharaoh has. He is so grateful for Joseph's wise counsel to store up the grain in the years of abundance so that Egypt and much of the region would have enough for the years of famine. And so Pharaoh recognizes his own abundance and shares it with Joseph's family. So maybe we can reinterpret that commandment to love the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. We can learn from the negative example of our people's oppression in Egypt and live those lessons. And we can also learn from the positive example of how our people were received into Egypt with generosity and welcome. This can be a model for how we act from a place of abundance. This year, Human Rights Shabbat is celebrating 10 years of partnership between Trua, a Jewish organization, and the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. How many of you are familiar with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers? Oh, then I'm definitely going to talk about it. Great, we didn't see many hands. I first encountered them about 10 years ago and was very inspired. And I'll tell you briefly. They're an organization run by farm workers in Florida, and they've had tremendous success in achieving more humane working conditions on the tomato farms, and even higher pay for farm workers. And they have many strategies, but one of them is to run campaigns to pressure food corporations to join the Fair Food Program. And as part of that program, they commit to only purchasing tomatoes from farms that have certain level of humane working conditions. And the corporations who are purchasing the tomatoes pay 1 penny more per pound of tomatoes. And that penny gets passed directly to the farm workers who pick the tomatoes. Now, in 10 years of this program, that has resulted in $36 million more being paid directly to farm workers. It's a huge achievement. And for me, it was a perfect example of how this coalition helped a society to recognize abundance and to realize that we could share that abundance with those who deserve it and need it more. So if you want to participate in this work, it's not over, because they're still campaigning to get additional corporations to sign on. So you can go home and Google Human Rights Shabbat, and that will bring you to the right link. They're currently pressuring Wendy's to join the Fair Food Program. So on this Human Rights Shabbat, I pray that we each feel grateful for the blessings that fill our cups, and that gratitude can motivate us to act to make those blessings overflow. Shabbat Shalom.